Hello, students. How are you all? I hope so. You all are great and doing well. So, today I have brought a theme and poetic devices of the poem that is Crossing the Bar. And we have done this poem in our last class. And I hope so. You all are well aware of the poem, right? So, today we'll be moving on to understand the theme and poetic devices of this poem that is Crossing the Bar. So, as you can see on the screen, the poem is an eye opener on the reality that surrounds death. It lays emphasizes on the following themes, right? So, the poem, draws the attention of the readers towards the reality. And what is the reality here? The reality means that which surrounds the death, right? Means we have to abandon this world one day, and it is the reality, right? So it emphasizes on the following themes. So you can just see that there are following themes. First is grief free farewell. So the poetic persona has it emphasized in the poem that no one should feel bad, cry, or mourn when he dies. This is because he is going to see his creator in a better place. So this is the first theme of the poem, that is grief free farewell, right? So the poet is not sad at all, rather poet welcomes his death very cheerfully, happily, joyfully, and he wants others not to wail and mourn over his death. Rather, he wants to abandon this world on a happy note, right? So this is the first theme of the poem, that is grief free farewell, right? Now the second is courage in the face of death. So in the poem, one is encouraged to embrace the phenomenon of death, since it is inevitable and will always come to us. So now the second theme, as you can see, that is courage, dare in the face of death. So one should always have a courage to embrace the death. Why? Because we cannot withdraw ourselves from the death, because it has to come one day, and it is inevitable death. We cannot avoid our death, right? So it's better for everybody that we have to just accept, embrace death with great joy and pleasure, right? So this is the second theme of the poem, that poet is talking about, that one must have always courage in the face of the death, right? Now the next is life after death. It is always emphasized in the poem that there exists a place where one will find him herself after embracing death. The nature of the place the poetic personae did not generally explain, but individually he opines that he hopes to see his pilot face to face when he dies. Where this pilot is, the poetic persona did not say, but if one assumes that his pilot refers to God, then it can be said that the pilot is in heaven. So now the third theme is life after that. So the poet does. So the poem is also reflecting the life which is after death. So it is very clear from this poem that poet is talking about the world which is after death. So, right. So this word is a temporary word. This is a temporal word, and it will come to an end one day. And where is the real world? The real world is in heaven, where Pilate is, where God is. So the poet is laying a stress on this point, that one has to accept that with courage, one has to be courageous, daring in the face of death. And then after that, what will happen? There is a beautiful life, and this life is eternal, right? Because this life has no end, because the soul abandons, leaves the physical body only. So there is a shift from physical body to the spiritual world, right? So from physical in spiritual form, right? So now the poet is saying that so there is a life after that, and one gets chance to meet with the God Almighty pilot who is the real creator, friend, guide of the human beings, right? Now, the fourth is time. One of the prominent themes in the poem is the concept of time. The reader is meant to understand that there is a time for everything, and this time take permission from no one to occur and as waits for none. The time to be born and time to die. Then it tells us not to bother about the time of death but to embrace it. It would also preach that when any awful event of life occurs, one should embrace it so as to be able to understand and proffer a lasting solution to it, right? So, poet is also emphasizing the time that, and it is also a very good theme of the poem, right? Which revolves around the poem, right? Because there is a certain time of everything. There is a, you know, there is a time of everything. We can say that, right? Time to just take birth in the world, time to take existence in the world, and time to just right, and time to depart from the world, right? So there's a time of everything in the world, and poet is actually laying a stress on this uh, factor, on this theme, that there's a time of everything, right? So one has to always comprehend that if one is in problem, if one is in trouble, so this trouble will not last forever and ever. So there's a time when this issues, problems will go away, right? And because the time to be born and time to die is actually fixed, right? So it actually gives us message that we must not be perturbed, we must not be disturbed, we must not be bothered about the time of demise, about the time of death. Rather, we must have that sort of mindset to acknowledge it, to embrace it, right? And further, it also preaches us that when any miserable, pathetic events of life happens, so one must always accept it. Why? Because if we accept it, we must be, means we will be able to understand it, right? And we will have a lasting solution to it as well. So again, it's a very beautiful theme, and it's a very important and significant theme of the poem, that is time, right? Now we are gonna study about some poetic devices of this poem, right? So now the first is alliteration, right? So let's see what is alliteration. This is when two consonant sounds follow each other. So alliteration means when two consonant sounds follow each other, right? So and you will just understand it better with the help of some examples, right? So this device is employed in stanza 1, line 2, and one clear call for me, and line 2 of the stanza, two full four sound and form. So here you can see the first letter of clear and call, right? So this is the consonant sound, right? So this is called alliteration, right? So when consonant sounds follow each other, it is called alliteration. So you can see CC here, right? And now in the next line, full, see the F in full, and again F in for, and again F in form, right? So full for form. So here it is again alliteration. So this is called alliteration. You have to focus on consonant sounds of the word, right? Now the second is euphemism. This is when something harsh and unpleasant is said or expressed in a mild way. The notion of death, which is known to be unpleasant, is set in the poem as something simple and normal. Mild words and expressions like one clear call, I embark, and cross the bar are used in the poem to refer to death. So what is euphemism? Euphemism is a very good poetic devices which actually beautifies the words, phrases, right? Suppose if we refer to death, so there are certain very beautiful, very mild phrases and words which will just which will make the word death appear very beautiful. Rather, death is a very unpleasant word. No one wants to hear this word, that is death. But if we take support of euphemism in our words, phrases, then it looks very beautiful. So here the poet has taken help of euphemism. The poet has just used euphemism as poetic devices just to make the word death appear beautiful, right? So up here there are following phrases which have been used by the poet to refer to death, like one clear call, I am back, cross to the bar. These all are used in the poem to refer to death, right? And in English, there's a word die. So simply we cannot use it that he has died, she has died, right? So simply we can use that he breathed his last, right? She breathed her last. So this is called euphemism, right? Die is considered to be very unpleasant and harsh word, but in place of it there is a euphemism, that is breathe one's last, means to means to pass away, right? So in this way we can just make the words, phrases very pleasant, pleasing, right? So now the next is symbolism. Again means something which is a symbol of something, right? So this is the use of symbols and symbolic expression to depict, reveal an idea. Expressions like sunset and evening star symbolizes beginning and the end respectively. Bar symbolizes death and a bell symbolizes time, right? So poet has also used many symbols in the poem, right? So the poem is very symbolic, right? Because there is a symbolic expressions in the poem which highlights, reveals the idea, right? And you can see expressions in the poem like sunset. So sunset symbolizes beginning and evening stars symbolizes end of the day. Similarly, bar symbolizes death and bell symbolizes time, right? So in this way you can understand that poet has used symbolism as a poetic devices in the poem. Now the next is repetition. So this is the mentioning of a word or a group twice or more times in a poem, mainly for emphasizes. So sometimes what happens, you see a specific word or phrase many times in the poem. So this is again a very good technique of poem, just to emphasize this word, just to lay stress on these words. So this is called repetition, when words or phrases are repeated frequently again and again in the stanza, in the line. So it is called repetition, right? So the poem hints more on the time, as such word when is repeated in the poem in the last lines of the third and last stanza. It emphasizes that death will surely come in time, though the time is often unknown to us. May is another word that is repeated in the poem in line 3 of the first stanza and line 3 of the third stanza. It is emphasized to hint at the notion of no mourning when death comes. Also in the poem, the notion of death is repeatedly emphasized in all the stanzas. So you can see there are certain words which have been used by the poet repeatedly. So it is called repetition, right? I hope so you have understood it. Now the next is imagery. It is also poetic device. This is when a word or group of words create sound, image, smell, taste in our mind. So there are certain words which are used by the poet just to create audio and visual effects in the mind of the readers, right? So it's a very beautiful poetic device that is used by authors, poets in their literary work. So it creates sound. So you can see audio and visual imagery can be found in line 1 of stanza and 3, evening bell. So evening bell is a phrase which has been used by the poet just to make the reader think of the sound of the bell, and just to create the image of the evening bell, right? So whenever you just see the word evening bell, so what do you see so what do you get in your mind, right? You just create the image, picture of the evening bell in your mind, and you also just create the sound of the evening bell in your mind, that now evening bell is being rung, right? Evening bell is ringing, right? So this sort of things develops in your mind, right? And it creates sounds in the reader's mind and a picture of a bell too. In line 1 and 2 of stanza 2, the poetic persona creates an audio image with the idea of the sound made when the sea tide moves. Words like the dark, flood, boundless deep, pilot bar, and so on create a visual image. So all these things develop visuals image in your mind, right? So the reader is made to visualize them in his or her mind when reading the poem, right? So what is the primary purpose of using imagery as a poetic device? Just to make the reader create, develop visuals in the mind while reading the poem, right? Now the next is metaphor, and you all are aware of that. What is metaphor? When there is a comparison between two unrelated things and the comparison is hidden, implied comparison, so this is called metaphor. So you can see here the quality of the pilot as the one who directs the course of an aeroplane and the passenger is used metaphorically in the poem to refer to the quality ability of the one who directs the cause of the universe and all the living things in it. God more so, the act of crossing the bar is compared to the act of dying or transiting to the next word, right? So the poet metaphorically talks in the poem, as you are well aware of it, right? So there is a metaphor between the things in the poem, just like you can see crossing the bar is being compared to the act of dying or moving to the next word, right? And the quality of the pilot who actually directs the course of the aeroplane and the passengers is used metaphorically in the poem to refer to the quality ability of the one who directs the cause of the universe and all living things in it, right? So you can see a lot of metaphors in the poem, right? So you need to sustain in mind only one thing, that whenever there is a hidden comparison between two unrelated things, two things are not related to each other, so it is called metaphor, right? Now the next is irony. This simply means opposite of what is meant, right? So suppose whenever you say something and that is opposite of your of actual meaning of that thing, so it is called irony, that is sarcasm, right? The use of this technique is not obvious in the poem. However, it can be fished out easily with a close attention. In reality, death is not something to cheer about, since it means that probably someone dear heart is gone and gone forever. But the poem encourages the reader to accept the event of that with a good heart. Whenever you are the deceased relation, and it is ironical as the reader expects that death will be condemned, rather it is condoned, right? So irony is not evident, obvious, clear in the poem, but it can be seen how. And as I've told you that what is irony, when means when opposite of something is spoken, so that is irony, that is sarcasm, right? So here when somebody dies, when someone breathes his or her last, right, and when someone passes away from the world, so what exactly happens? You're right, it creates sorrow, grief in the hearts of the people. It is not easy for the people to embrace death of the dear ones, right? But here what is being spoken by the poet, that death must be welcomed on a happy note, cheerfully, delightfully. So it is irony, it is sarcasm. The poet is actually speaking opposite of what is reality, what is fact, what is the truth. And here the fact of the truth is that death cannot be embraced or welcomed by anyone cheerfully, with great pleasure, joy. Death itself is a very harsh and unpleasant word which no one wants to hear it. It is as simple as that. But the poet is just revealing the fact that death must be welcomed with great pleasure and joy. So this is a very different perspective and perception of the poet. So this is irony. This is irony. The poet is talking in contrast to what is the reality, what is the fact. So this is irony and sarcasm, right? So I hope so that you have understood the theme as well as some poetic devices which have been used by the poet in the poem. Now all you have to do is to sustain in mind, and you have to make a beautiful notes in your notebook, so that it just could fix in your mind, and it should not come out of your mind, right? And you can just take the help of poetic devices while writing answers in your exam. It will work as an embellishment in your answers. It will add on your answers, right? So I hope so it is clear to all of you, right? See you. Take care of yourself.